Welcome to Andy Staples on 3, and it would not be a Thursday without some transfer portal drama. We will get into the entire Ole Miss Quinshon Judkins situation, all those Lane Kiffin tweets that seem to narrate the whole situation while Lane Kiffin was apparently fishing. This is college football in 2024, ladies and gentlemen. It's a lot of fun, but we also will go deep into the national championship game. We've got Brock Huard from Fox Sports, former Washington starting quarterback. We'll talk some Huskies with him. We'll also talk some Michigan. Brock covers both these teams, has dealt with them a lot, and knows the Huskies intimately, obviously. And he will explain why we are sleeping on Michael Penix still after seeing all this stuff. Then J.D. Pickell and I are picking the national championship game. We both had a pretty good run there in the New Year's Six in the semifinals. So we'll see who comes out on top here, because I think we're going to be on opposite sides of this thing. So interested to hear what JD says about his choice. I know how I feel about my choice, and it was not an easy choice. So we'll get to that later in the show. But first, we have got to talk about this Quinshon Judkins situation. He is leaving Ole Miss, headed to parts unknown. What's Ole Miss going to do now? There's a lot bigger picture to this than just Quinshon Judkins, a very good running back that Ole Miss recruited out of high school, going to a different school. This says a lot about where NIL is, where the transfer portal is in microcosm. So, of course, we're bringing our friend Pete Nakos to talk about all of it. Here's Pete. You knew we were going to let a weekend without talking to Pete Nakos one more time, because the transfer portal never sleeps. And we had quite a bit of drama on Thursday as Quinshon Judkins, Ole Miss running back, a guy Lane Kiffin sat in the cold and the rain while he recruited, got him out of high school, 31 rushing touchdowns over the past 2 seasons, has entered the transfer portal and has made an announcement, and it certainly sounds like there's no going back from this one, that he is out of Ole Miss.
He is certainly out of the SIP, which has definitely kind of thrown a wrench into some plans, I think, at Ole Miss right now. And definitely a situation that did not just develop in the last 24 hours. Definitely something that has maybe been playing out for a couple months now, and definitely at least the last 10 days.
Well, Pete, I remember when the Grove Collective did their deal with Quinshon Judkins last year, because everybody thought, oh, he blew up as a freshman, went to Alabama or whoever come in and try to pluck him away. And it was the first time I remembered ever seeing a collective announce that it had a deal with somebody. And now you see it happen all the time. But it seemed like a big keep for Ole Miss. We've seen Ole Miss very active in this transfer portal. They got Juice Wells. They got Walter Nolan. They have definitely upgraded talent. But the door does swing both ways. And I'm curious, Pete, because we keep talking about how all of this NIL and transfer portal stuff feels like NFL free agency. Mm-hmm. Can a running back expect to get paid?
Yeah, I think that's the question a lot of people are dealing with today. I'll tell you, just from talking to people, that the Grove Collective has really put together some great packages, I think, in this transfer portal cycle that has made things very attractive to some athletes. I also, though, think it's fair to say, I don't know if a running back is worth 7 figures in college football right now. I think if you look at the NFL and what running backs are making at the moment, and it's hard to compare, but my point is, running backs are on the low pay scale in the NFL, and I think that you're going to continue to see that running backs are on the low pay scale in college football.
The highest deal I've heard this offseason, Pete, I don't know about you, but the biggest one I've heard was in the $350,000 a year range. And
I heard that same one
for a running back. And
yep,
that's about it. Like I haven't heard anything bigger than that. Not even people asking for bigger than that, because it feels like people understand that it's just not the same position of need as offensive lineman, defensive tackle, quarterback, that sort of thing. But this is a really good player, Pete. He's been very productive over the years. A lot of carries, actually, kind of an old school feel with 20 plus carries a game both years.
Yeah, I mean, scored over 30 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons combined. I mean, what Quinshon Judkins can do to an offense should not be undervalued. I know we're just talking about dollars. I think that the Grove Collective took care of him maybe more than your average college football linebacker. And I know there's a little frustration today at Ole Miss how it all went down. But yeah, I mean, you said it right. The production, what he can do on the field, how he can help open up the passing game for Jackson Dart. But if you really want to get nitty gritty with NIL here, I think it's important to mention like maybe not allocating as much funds to a running back, but going in on like 2 great offensive tackles. Like those are decisions collectives have to make. And arguably, it might be the smarter decision to spend on the offensive line.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like the NFL, there's a salary cap. They've got to manage it that way. In NIL, there's no salary cap, but there is a finite amount of money in any sort of situation. There's not a tree that somebody can go on and pluck a few more bucks off. So they do have to make these decisions at some point. So I very much enjoyed watching Lane Kiffin tweet in real time through this thing. Now, he apparently was fishing with his kids, but the tweets were awfully specific, including one where they catch a shark and he captions it, catch and release. At essentially, I don't know, this was like 30 minutes before Quinshon Judkins' I'm leaving graphic came out.
Lane Kiffin continues to be the best follow on Twitter, formerly Twitter, now X.
Yes, X.
It's like the Pac-12. But anyways, yes, Lane Kiffin remains one of the best follows on social media. And then today's events, I don't think anyone could have subtweeted it better.
No. Well, okay, here's another one. And this is, again, sometimes reading Lane is a fool's errand because we don't know what's going on in his life at the moment. But it always feels like there's an ulterior motive. So it might be that they got off the boat, they got back to Del Boca Vista Phase 3, and just happened to see this Auburn golf cart. But he happens to tweet out a picture of a golf cart with an Auburn logo on it. And I don't know what this is supposed to mean. Does this mean, Quinshon Judkins is from Montgomery, which is very close to Auburn. Does that mean he thinks that Quinshon Judkins is going to go to Auburn? Or does it mean that Ole Miss wants somebody who plays at Auburn to come to them? Like, I don't know what any of it means.
I'm not sure I'm going to connect the dots either at the moment. But the one thing I do want to bring up is, can we just talk about time and place with Lane Kiffin, Andy?
Yes.
Right? Like he was on a boat when this happened and then framed it perfectly. like completely perfectly. To the point where you wonder, and like he caught the biggest fish that like you've seen on social media in like a week. And then, I mean, ridiculous.
Unbelievable. And yeah, he was talking to Pete Golding. He's tweeting at Pete Golding, defensive coordinator, about did we land? Because they, got people coming to campus and visiting. And yeah, this is going to be a fascinating situation to see how it plays out. Where does Quinshon Judkins end up? Does Ole Miss go into the portal for another running back? If you subscribe to OM Spirit, our Ole Miss site at On3, Zach Berry's got a good breakdown of who Ole Miss already has coming back, who they have coming in. Needless to say, they do feel pretty good about the backs that they already have. So I don't know that they just need to go grab somebody from the portal, but I do think people will look at the amount of touches Quinshon Judkins got in that offense and go, I might enjoy that.
I do think the one really interesting thing to monitor with Quinshon, right, is like Alabama does not really need a running back.
No. We saw Justice Hayes get a bigger role in the Rose Bowl. Like Justice Hayes looks like the future at that position for Alabama.
Justice Hayes is definitely the future. You look at Georgia, they picked up Trevor Etienne. You look at a couple, Florida could use a running back, arguably. Florida State definitely needs a running back. Those could be 2 schools to watch early on. But yeah, Auburn also has a really good back in Jarquez Hunter. So what's it all mean? We'll find out. But yeah, definitely not like major openings right now where you're like, okay, Quinshon's definitely going to go there.
So elsewhere in the SEC, Georgia picks up a wide receiver, Michael Jackson from USC, who looked good in the bowl game. Probably was kind of like 3rd or 4th on their receiver depth this year.
he had like 5 touchdowns over the last, I think, 2 seasons it is, and like 500 yards. But definitely, with someone like the other guy, like Jordan Singer's out now, a few other guys. I think the point is though, like Michael Jackson was the future, and USC has obviously been linked to Evan Stewart, but nothing is like official or close to done there. So losing someone like Michael Jackson and then losing him to someone like Georgia, even, I mean, that's a huge loss for Lincoln Riley.
So another USC player in the portal is Malachi Nelson, the quarterback who was, a massive recruit in the class of 2023. It became clear USC was moving in a different direction in terms of QB1 for 2024. I think we knew that during the season. Malachi Nelson in the portal, his recruitment has not looked like the one the first time around. So Pete Thamel from ESPN reported he's taking a visit to Boise State, and there's a good chance he might land there.
Yeah, friend of the podcast, Ari Wasserman, made a point right after Malachi went in about like, why wouldn't a Power 5 team like take a waiver on Malachi? And I think what we're seeing playing out right now is that maybe some Power 5 schools just don't want to do that. Malachi's obviously going to go to Boise this weekend. Like you mentioned, Pete Thamel said that Boise is the favorite. Malachi's been dealing with injury for most of this year. I've been told he's still not 100% healthy, but he's definitely very close. Maybe Boise State's the best place to kind of get his feet back under him. But I think it is also a sign of maybe what the rest of the college football world thinks of him, that Boise State is going to be the first visit.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And that's one of those that, everybody saw him go in. And we got to remember, sometimes you have to divorce how you feel about the initial recruiting ranking from how you feel after the person's been in college for a little while, and kind of vice versa. That's one thing Ari and I talked about, Pete, when Ari came on the show, is we've got to figure out how to better rank these teams and evaluate their team talent once these guys come from the portal and go to another team, because I don't know that we properly evaluated how much Josiah Stewart was going to add to Michigan when he came from Coastal Carolina, but he clearly has been a great addition.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to obviously how maybe an athlete really isn't ready to be at a USC or an Oklahoma, just theoretically coming right out of high school, and that's why someone from Coastal Carolina ends up being the star in the Rose Bowl. It also goes to show the development that can happen, right? If maybe a group of 5 guy goes to a really big program like a Michigan, and they can be developed by some really good coaches there.
Yeah, it's so interesting how all the dynamics are changing here, and lots of names. Like the one you reported today, I thought was really interesting. So I don't know that a lot of people in college football know who Ken Seals is, but I think fans in SEC country probably know him pretty well, because he was at Vanderbilt for the last few years. He started as a true freshman at Vanderbilt and actually dealt with, multiple other people being named starter over him. He got the job back. It sort of went back and forth, but he's headed to TCU now.
Yeah, I think it's a great get for TCU. I don't know if Ken can necessarily earn the starting job right away, but he's definitely going to be a great option to fight for the starting job. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned like Vanderbilt with AJ Swan and everything. Like Ken stuck around and he really fought out to get playing time, and now
Mike Wright too.
Mike Wright, and now in Colorado. Yeah, I mean, definitely very interesting quarterback room that we can analyze in maybe a year and see how it all played out. But yeah, Ken Seals off to TCU. Can he be a Big 12 starting quarterback is the question.
Yeah, that'll be a fun one. So, all right, who are we looking at? Who are we waiting on? I have not mentioned Will Howard yet. You talked the other day about potential smoke between him and Ohio State. What is the latest on that one?
So, talk to someone in the Will Howard camp in the last 24 hours, and the way it was described to me is the NFL remains a viable option. It's very similar to Cam Ward. I think that maybe college it might be a little bit more viable than it was with Cam, but definitely he's on the Ohio State visit as we speak. I definitely think that Ohio State is the college to beat in this now. He obviously took visits to Miami and USC. I mean, Ohio State and the NFL kind of are the two options I'm hearing and looking at.
It's interesting because I know, Ohio State might be one of the only places in the country where when they introduce you to the people you get to throw to, probably feels about the same as if you got drafted onto an NFL team.
I mean, yeah. And Obviously, Julian Fleming announced yesterday he's off to Penn State, but now you got Carnell Tate, you got Brendan Ennis, and Jeremiah Smith.
Jeremiah Smith, exactly.
And Travion Henderson might be right behind you in the backfield too. So,
oh boy, it's going to be really interesting to see what he does. We'll wait and see if we get an answer there. But Pete, never a dull moment. We'll keep deciphering Lane Kiffin tweets and try to figure out what the next one means.
I can't wait.
Thank you to Pete Nakos, and who knows, maybe there's a little Will Howard Nakosification coming up in the near future. We'll find out if Will Howard is going to be an Ohio State Buckeye or if he's going to go to the NFL. I would imagine that's going to be pretty soon. Coming up Monday, we got an epic national title game coming. And want to make it more epic? Play Prize Picks while you're watching the game. Prize Picks is America's best daily fantasy platform. You sign up for Prize Picks, you use the referral code Andy. They will instantly match your first deposit up to $100. Here's how Prize Picks works. You play squares, and they'll have squares for players in the game. And it could be college football, it could be the NFL, it could be the NBA, it could be hockey, you name it. If there's a ball or a puck, they've got it. So for this particular game, let's look at the quarterbacks. Michael Penix Jr., 300.5 passing yards. You decide, is he going to throw for more than that or less than that? J.J. McCarthy, 200.5 passing yards. Now, Michigan does not throw the way Washington throws. So you have to decide, is J.J. going to throw for more than that or less than that? You could actually play those two, and if you put $50 down and you are correct on both counts, you win $150. But you could also go up to 5 squares if you wanted, and that increases the multiplier if you get it right. Prize Picks has a ton of ways to have fun playing as you watch these games. And one that I love, we're talking the quarterbacks still, is the passing, rushing, receiving combo. And we talked a little bit about how Michael Penix Jr. was doing a little more design running at the end of the Texas game because it felt like it was more effective against that particular defense. It might be more effective against this particular defense too, which could put rushing touchdowns into play for him. So 2.5 pass rush receiving. Could Michael Penix contribute 3 touchdowns through the air and on the ground? There's a distinct possibility. So Prize Picks has a lot of ways to play. Download that app. Use the referral code Andy. They will match your first deposit up to $100. Get playing. It's going to be a fun game on Monday night. You make it even more fun with Prize Picks. Now, let us dive deep into that game. Brock Huard, former Washington quarterback, all-time great Husky, also calls games for Fox Sports. He's seen both these teams up close, knows all about them. And after talking to him, you'll get even more excited for the national title game. Here's Brock. We welcome perhaps the only man who has ever out-eaten me. And, well, it's a long story. We'll get to it eventually. But Brock Huard, we have more important things to talk about. You see him on Fox. You hear him on Brock and Salk in Seattle. You have a podcast with your brother Damon, like all Huard all the time. And, oh, by the way, your alma mater's in the national title game.
And my girls are playing hoops together.
That's right.
It's University of Montana. Yes.
Go Grizzlies.
Oh, it's crazy times, Andy, but it's good times. Like I would not have it any other way. These last few weeks have been wild. Kind of reminds me, to be honest, back to 2005. My last year with the Seahawks, 04. I spent 4 years with them, 2 with the Colts. 05, I'm still trying to kind of figure out whether I can fool them for one more year. And then they're like, nope, you're a fraud. You can't play in the NFL. So go figure out something else with your life. I was doing media and a lot of real estate, actually, commercial real estate development. And then just so happens in 05, those Seahawks were pretty good.
Yeah.
And ESPN had a lot of money back then and paid to just have people go into a studio around the country, and the Seahawks just kept winning, and they just kept winning, and they just kept winning. And oh my gosh, look at all these cool opportunities I'm getting on the hot list. And that was kind of a big break for me, to be honest with you. Without that, I don't know, as geographically isolated as Seattle is, where the media thing would have gone when I look back on it now. So that was a huge break, huge opportunity. And this Husky run this year kind of feels a little bit like that. Like oh my gosh, look what these guys are doing. Oh my gosh, look at this offense. Oh my gosh, I love these guys. Oh my gosh, what a bunch of great dudes. And this Kalen DeBoer is as genuine as the day is long, and they're making this happen. And are they going to get all the way? They're getting all the way there. And Houston's going to be something kind of special Monday night.
Well, you're in such an interesting position because obviously you're close to it. You talk to people in the program, you watch the program closely, but you also go cover these games every week where you're seeing some of the best in college football. You called Michigan, Nebraska, so like you saw the best throw JJ McCarthy made all season in person. Like it is, you got that.
Yep.
And I'm curious because I still think there's a bit of an education gap when it comes to Washington and the rest of the country. Obviously, so many people watched the Sugar Bowl and they saw that, but I got so much, wow, have you seen that Washington quarterback? I'm like, yeah, he's been doing that for 2 years now.
You know what it reminds me of, Andy? And honestly, and I think I tweeted this the other day, it reminds me of the Denver Nuggets and Jokic. And you remember, I think even Lisa Salter said it on the air. It's like, wow, I've never watched these guys. Like, what are you talking about? He's been the 2-time MVP. Like, you've never watched them actually play and see what they do and how they share the ball and how Coach Malone has built the program and how these dudes love each other and care about each other. And Jokic is like the most incredible, impeccable, unselfish leader there is. And you never watched him? Don't say that out loud. You know, Mark, and bless Mark, who's no longer there, employed there and everything else. He's like, oh, yeah, I didn't even vote Jokic in my top 5 of the MVP ballot. Mark Jackson, like, what? You know,
and that's Penix right there.
Yes, and it is. And Penix is the same kind of unselfish, the same kind of, I don't need the spotlight. And you know what? DeBoer and Malone, very different. You know, they communicate differently. A lot more swearing from the former. I don't think DeBoer does swear, or I've certainly not heard him. But they built the same thing. It's about the guys. It's about the players. It's about the locker room. It's about everybody else. And yeah, there's quite a parallel between what the Nuggets did and nobody thought the Nuggets could ever do this, right? Come on. How are the Nuggets going to win a world champ? They can be good. Washington won 11 games last year. They can be good, but they're not that good. They're not actually going to lift the trophy. No, the Nuggets did it, and now the Huskies are 60 minutes away from doing it Monday as well.
Well, and watching Washington do it against Texas's defense, it didn't look any different than it's looked against all the other defenses they did it against. The one that's really given them problems was Arizona State. Everybody else has kind of been in the same boat. Like, we can't cover these receivers. Penix, it's amazing to me because I've heard you guys talking this week on your show about how different he is than everybody in college football.
Mm-hmm.
Caleb Williams is the only other person who I've seen in college football this year who can make throws like Penix can. But Penix feels more surgically accurate than anyone.
Yes. Yeah. The only time he misses, Andy, is when he's a little juiced and he misses high. And that was going to be like, okay, I'm going to watch the first couple series of this game against Texas because called the Apple Cup and you know, he was just more inaccurate in that game. And I think it was the weight of everything and the pressure of everything and the Heisman looming and all of this targets getting so big on him that was about the one game that on tape you really watch. You're like, man, there were 3, 4, 5 throws. And then people started to wonder, is he injured? Is he hurt? You know, he's not been quite as accurate. And then he just shut all of it up in Vegas and put on an absolute show. And then even more so in New Orleans. What was it? 16 times. Klatt was on my show this morning, Andy. He was pressured 16 times, he being Penix in that game. He was taken to the ground once.
Wow.
Jalen Milroe was pressured 12 times by Michigan. He was sacked 6 times.
Yeah.
The difference of understanding, of pocket awareness, of movement, of creating, extending plays. I mean, it's just night and day. I mean, it's JV and varsity. And Penix is doing it at a level that nobody else in college football has.
Well, and I've heard you talk about that. And as someone who's done it at the NFL level, how important is that just being able to move around, to slide up in the pocket, to know where you need to be so that your linemen can continue blocking the way they've been instructed to block and you can get that throwaway?
That's the game, man. I mean, that's the game at the next level. And I love Russell. And you know what? Without Russell Wilson, again, I guess this time today is you and me reflecting on my past and knowing that I would have not been even in media without 2005 Seahawks. And I don't know if I'd have a radio show today without 2012 Russell Wilson, because our show went from like this to they won a Super Bowl and took off, and he was unbelievable. But you see how sustainable that's not. And over the course of time here, ran out in Seattle. Sean Payton ran out after about 5 weeks. I think he was done with that situation. And like, that's not sustainable versus, okay, run when you need to run. And I love this about Grubb and Penix too, Andy, is that's always been there. I mean, Michael Penix going to run, I think, in the 4.6s at the combine. And people are going to be like, what? How can he do that? I had no idea. Well, actually, he's a tremendous athlete. He does have 2 ACLs, and he chooses not to use that until he has to. And I thought they played that perfectly last week. I think that will be a key Monday as well. Maybe some design QB run at times. Hey, man, there's nothing now. Like, it's all on the table. And if we got to run you 5 or 6 times, he's still a great athlete and is capable of doing it. It's just that he knows to sustain and to protect himself. Playing in that pocket and getting rid of the ball, 16 sacks in 27 games, 11 this year, 5 the previous year. I mean, it is just pretty darn special stuff.
Yeah, it is. And I noticed that there were a few more design runs there at the end of the Texas game.
Yep.
And because it's very hard to just line up and run conventionally into those monsters that Texas has on the D line. Because we saw Washington do it against Oregon late, where they were just handing off and salting the game away. Couldn't do it against Texas, but could move a little bit with Penix. But I think you're right about that. You pull out all the stops in this game, give yourself the entire playbook, which, against Michigan, they've not seen this level of explosion in an offense because Kyle McCord isn't CJ Stroud. So some of those older guys who played the CJ Stroud Buckeyes and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka, they'll probably remember this. But the guys who didn't play much last year probably won't have seen anything like this.
Nope. I know that's going to be more and more of the conversation leading up to kickoff is, hey, the Huskies have not seen a Michigan, right? Have not seen an unapologetic bully like Michigan that will run it 35 straight times or 16 to 17 times. And I get that, and they have not. But this is a Michigan team that's without a couple of their linemen, and the loss of Zinter is still a huge one. And you know what? I'm not going to make a case that Washington has seen that. Utah is not that. The Utah that they got to face with no Cam Rising, that was not this Michigan. That probably would have been the closest equivalent, but it still wasn't the same. Saying all of that, Michigan's seen nothing, and I mean nothing, like they're going to see with Washington's offense. They faced 2 top 50 offenses all year, right? Ohio State and Bama, and neither of those have the quarterback play, the weaponry, the artillery that Washington has. Washington has faced with Texas and with Oregon twice. They have faced defenses who, to a man, bigger, stronger, faster, longer, mix schemes, show different things, well coached. They have seen it. They have seen it with both Texas, who had 5 weeks to get ready for them, and with Oregon in their own conference, right, 3 times in a calendar year and could not handle them. And I don't expect Michigan to shut down Kalen DeBoer's crew. There's just too much weapons. There's run, there's pass, there's slot receivers, there's tight ends, there's a QB run game, there's outside one-on-one weapons that you can't cover in one-on-one. They're going to move the ball. It's just how many times they get that ball and how many possessions to make that kind of difference.
Let's talk about Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, the prides of Sioux Falls. Did you know when Kalen got hired? Because obviously Kalen was well respected in the field. He'd been good at Fresno State. Everybody who dealt with him in Indiana loved him. But did you realize how big of a step the program could take under him?
No, and give a lot of credit, and her name has not been mentioned, and she's no longer there, and she's at USC. But Jen Cohen deserves a shout out or 100 because she had to make that move. And Jimmy Lake's shove of that player, as Salk was saying this morning on our show, like that whole like sliding doors. What if Jimmy Lake had never shoved that player, not had that public of a moment? Would Jen Cohen and the board and the boosters been able to just say, hey, and fail fast. This isn't working. This isn't our guy. We got to fail fast. An old Amazon ideology up in the Northwest, right? Like this isn't our guy. And I don't know if she would have been able to do that, but that did happen. They were able to move on from Jimmy, and then she made a hard hire from a name standpoint. The coaching community knew it, Andy. Like you talked to all these coaches. I remember Brian Polian on the field. We had Stanford, Notre Dame, final game of that year, right before Brian Kelly left. And Brian Polian, who had background with his dad, Bill, in Indy and played for her. And Brian pulled me aside. He said, your program better do the right thing. It was out. Jimmy had been fired. He's like, they better hire Kalen DeBoer. He is the best coach for that job. I'm like, really? I hadn't done a Kalen game. I hadn't had him at Fresno or Indiana. I hadn't bumped or, cross pass him. He's like, unbelievable coach. And then Andy, that move gets made and he gets hired and my phone goes ping, 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 ping. Different coaches are like, that's a great hire. That is a great hire. That guy's a football guy. That guy is a great hire. And man, Jen Cohen knew it then, had the guts and the resolve to not have to just get a familiar name and settle for a name, settle for a great coach. And no, I would not have imagined after a 4-8 season and a loss to Montana a few years ago that they would win 21 in a row, 14-0, be at a place they have never been in the history of the program, and staring down a national title here on Monday.
Yeah, it is pretty incredible, and it does feel like DeBoer almost always makes the right decision. We've been going back and forth on the show this week about, maybe they should have taken knees instead of risking Dylan getting hurt.
They should have run it on 3rd and 10. They should have done that.
Yeah.
They should not have thrown the ball away.
That's the only time I can think of in Washington games I watched over the last 2 years where I have not said that's the right call. Even when they're going for it on 4th down in their own territory in the first half of the Sugar Bowl, I'm like, sure.
Well, what was that? I mean, like he would say to you, like, we don't think about the negative of that. And if we went for it on 4th down in the Apple Cup at our own 27 and ran an end around reverse flip, if we did that, what's anything else now? Like, Andy, of all of my years in a booth, there have been a few moments, the Hypnotoad in a hurry.
Yep.
And Eddie's great call on the TCU walk-off, right?
I thought you guys were going to have a heart attack in that game. That was the TCU Baylor game in 2022.
Yeah, I was shaking. I was literally, as that was happening, I was on, and I think I said that, I'm shaking right now because I was shaking right now at what I just saw. And second to that moment was that 4th down. You don't get that, you lose the game. I mean, you lose the Apple Cup and you lose a playoff, and you and I are not doing this today. So they make that call, and not just a conventional call. Let's run a end around to Rome on a reverse and, flip it where, 100 things could go wrong. And so, man, once you've done that, what's left? What was left for the Sugar Bowl? What's going to be left in the national title game to just show the kind of stones, the kind of confidence, the kind of belief that emanates from him and his team carries on?
Well, I do feel like this is a case of two teams that do mirror their head coach's belief in them. And you've had Michigan as well. What have you seen from Michigan in terms of, because this is very different than 3 years ago. We thought Jim Harbaugh was getting fired.
It feels like, and I've said this to a few different people, it feels like the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Baltimore Ravens. And that's not just because John coaches there, but that's what it kind of feels like. And I know that the host city would have probably preferred Tuscaloosa and Austin and 2 towns, the driving distance and college towns and the ticket prices and everything else. And instead they kind of get 2 northern NFL cities. Ann Arbor's a college town, no question about it, and the winningest program ever. But it's Detroit and it's Seattle. And when I look at this has a pro style feel, pro style players, pro style schemes. I think Jim Harbaugh will be a pro coach next year again. And it is the Ravens, who are unapologetic bullies, who build the team that way. Obviously, Jim plucked from the Ravens defensive coaching staff and has continued that and continued that on with new staff and new coordinator and everything, employing those principles. And they believe in one another wholeheartedly and in the culture of their program. And Kalen on the flip side, it's the same way. And he reminds me a lot of Andy Reid and the confidence that he carries, and they do it offensively. And in Mahomes, you got a difference maker and a generational player. And at the collegiate level, Michael's been pretty darn generational and does it with a whole bunch of weapons. And I think we're kind of watching the Chiefs and the Ravens in a playoff game just down there in Houston with more than playoff implications, national title implications.
Before I let you go, I do want to ask about this because you had a segment on your show on Wednesday about this, and I thought it was really interesting because what Michael Penix will be in the draft. Like if you watch college football at all this year, you're like, oh my God, this is the best thrower of the football in college right now, the best draft eligible thrower of the football coming out. But it seems like it's all been tempered by the injuries he suffered at Indiana, the 2 ACLs. He had a couple shoulder injuries. Where do you think he winds up in the draft?
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. Our buddy Bruce Feldman is putting a piece together, and he and I have some background on this. I was in Indiana a few years ago, Andy, and it was not just injuries; it was shut down.
Yeah,
and he said in the article with Bruce, like, I was scared to play, and you could see that. Like he was legitimately, after all of those injuries, after the battering that he took, after a supporting cast that was so limited around him, and he had to elevate everybody and do everything. And man, they beat Penn State, they beat Michigan, and toe to toe with Ohio State. It was all on him. That the tank was empty. And if you would have told me then, as I sat in those meetings with Tom Allen and their staff and some of their people, like this is who we're talking about. I mean, this was Humpty Dumpty, and he was broken. And to think that he could be rebuilt in this way and put all back together and playing at this level, I honestly would have never imagined that 3 years ago. NFL scouts now, there's going to be some teams that say, yeah, no thanks. Nope. If he gets that broken and that beat up and he's that low and he's doubting himself, I don't want any part of that. He's out. Take him off the board. And then there's going to be other wiser programs that go, hold on a second. Isn't this exactly what we want? Don't we want this stress test? Isn't this why we put people on a treadmill and we don't just keep them walking, but we speed it up and we ramp up the incline? And I think of my daughter who had to do that one time. And she said to the UW doctor, like, what's the record? He's like, no, that's not what she's like, what's the record? Yeah. No, Macy, understand there's cross country runners, no, what is the time? How steep did they run? And this was the ultimate stress test. And Penix has been through it and got through it. And now he's on the other side of it. And there will be programs in the NFL that love that and love that experience. So he won't be on everybody's board. He won't be a first rounder for everybody, but there is no way in the world after this body of work the last 2 seasons, that arm that when they see it in person at the Senior Bowl, they see it at the Combine, they see the ball come off his hands, like this is just different. There will be a team or two that will take him in the top 10.
It's going to be really interesting. I saw Tom Allen, the Indiana coach, at the coaches convention right after Penix announced he was going to Washington. And Tom said, we love him, but he needs to get a fresh start. He needs to try something else. And it's night and day, just night and day. It's unbelievable to watch. And
yes,
may end up.
I'm trying to think, Andy, like how many other quarterbacks, like the Joe Burrow story is a great one, right? And he had to leave Ohio State, and there were some like, oh, well, you quit on them, you couldn't beat out so-and-so, and then
he got beat out by a first-round draft pick.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But he had to kind of start over and rebuild, and there's been plenty of those stories. But give me the story of totally broken, scared to play, and then on the other end of it, came out of it and handled all of this success, handled all of this target, handled all of this being like how many guys that come into the NFL with that full spectrum, that teeter-totter on both sides, because there's a lot of question, right? Can this guy handle success? And is he going to handle being the face? And is he going to handle, well, you know what? When he opened his jacket up at the Heisman ceremony, pretty cool. Pretty big moment that sticks in everybody's mind, right? It's not about me. It's about everybody else. And it's real and genuine. So he's handled that. And then he's handled this abyss and this darkness and this failure in this like, oh my gosh, I may never play again. And I'm scared to play. So to handle both of those, I don't know how many prospects have been in that kind of mode over the years. Not many come to my mind. I'm sure there is, but not very many. And it will be, as I said, appealing to someone, certainly at the NFL level.
And he might have a national championship ring coming his way by that point. So we'll find out. Brock, thank you so much.
Always a blast, Andy. Keep eating, man. Okay, whatever you do, keep eating. And the next time I see you at a dinner table, we'll go toe-to-toe again.
Okay, so I promised I would tell you the story about Brock Huard out eating me. And here's what happened. So this is probably about 10 years ago now. Joe Tessitore, the ESPN announcer, invites me. He knew I was in New York visiting the offices at Sports Illustrated, and Joe knew that I was up in New York. And Joe said, hey, we're having a dinner with some people at my brother-in-law's restaurant in New Haven, Connecticut. And it's an Italian restaurant. The food's supposed to be delicious. And it's Joe Tessitore, one of the all-time great storytellers and just gourmands. So I'm like, absolutely, I'm in. So I hop on the train and go. And Joe's wife picks me up at the train station, takes me to Joe's house. This is when Brock's still at ESPN. So Joe and Brock are on the couch watching that day's edition of College Football Live. And Joe's like backing it up like he's a football coach, like explaining, okay, now here's what we said here. Here's what we should have said here. It was fascinating to watch. But Brock was still somewhat new to that level of media. And so Joe was working with him and trying to polish him up. Now, if you watch Brock on these games on Fox, you know he's very much a finished product now. He is awesome at this stuff. So, but that apparently worked up an appetite in Brock because, as you know, if you've watched / listened to this show for a while, I am a man of large appetites. And so we go to Joe's brother-in-law's restaurant, and it is as spectacular as you can imagine. The sauce that he started making in the morning that they put on the arancini. Oh, I still have just dreams about the arancini in that sauce. They keep bringing food. It just plate after plate after plate after plate. The thing that was the best in this meal, and there were a lot of great courses, braised short rib over polenta. It was amazing. And so Brock and I could not get enough of this. But at a certain point, I had enough. And I had probably consumed 7,000 calories at this point. Brock is still going. Now, if you've ever seen Brock, he looks like he could step onto the field in the NFL and play quarterback today. And I always tell people, it's not the 300-pound guys that can eat the most. It is the hollow-legged quarterbacks, the big raw-bone quarterbacks. Sometimes they're the rangy defensive end types. Those are the people that can pack it down the best. That is Brock Huard. That man put me to shame that night. I just remember they hand me another bowl of these short ribs with polenta. And with a tear in my eye, I'm pushing it toward the middle of the table. And Brock is reaching over and grabbing it to devour it. The man's a marvel, an absolute marvel. So that's why when I see Brock, I don't think about all the games he won at Washington or how many years he played in the NFL. I just remember the shame of letting those short ribs go to him. But he deserved them. He earned them. He won them fair and square. That's all right. Speaking of winning fair and square, it's time to find out whether me or JD Pickell is going to pick this national championship game correctly. And we did not say, hey, let's get on opposite sides of this thing. We both did our research, did our homework, and it just turned out that way. Let us break it down and get to our picks for the national title game. All right, it is time to pick the national title game. JD Pickell and I, we were pretty darn good picking those New Year's Six games. JD, I was 5-1 against the spread and straight up.
Ooh, okay, that's solid. What was the one? Because I know we differed on Missouri, Ohio State, and you got that one.
I missed the Rose Bowl. What was the? I picked Alabama in the Rose Bowl, and
well, I did too. So I guess so. You did better than me in that sense, but yeah, that's 5-1. I mean, you go 5 for 6 in anything. You're a Hall of Famer, you know.
I still got that 0-8 hanging around my neck like an albatross from week 3, so I can't really say much. But yes, this is going to be a fun one. I've gone back and forth on who I want to pick in this game. I went on Jim Rome and I was like, I was all in on Washington, and I realized I haven't made an official pick here. It certainly sounds like I'm picking Washington here. Perhaps I need to study this a little more and get a little more in depth and make sure this is exactly what I want to do here. But JD, this is such a fun matchup because Michigan has not seen an offense like Washington's, and Washington has not seen an offense like Michigan's.
No, I mean, I think that the thing that's interesting too is when I started breaking this thing down, I kind of looked at, on paper, okay, what are the edges for Michigan? What are the edges for Washington? And the glaring edge is the line of scrimmage, what they don't have up front defensively for the Huskies. I mean, they're averaging, giving up right around 4.5 yards a carry, whereas Michigan's like a 60% of the time run the football team. And so at first I was saying, okay, well, hey, Michigan's going to kind of pound the rock. And I sort of caught myself saying, okay, JD, you've said this before a few times. You said the same thing about Texas. You said about Oregon twice. They were going to run the line of scrimmage. And both times you were right in the sense that the opposition did on the line of scrimmage. I think Oregon ran for almost 200 yards that first day they had. And then Texas ran for 6 yards a carry, but they just had those monsters on the outside of the Washington offense. And that was kind of the end of the deal there. So it's a tricky one to break down. But like you said, I think we're in for a box office kind of affair here this upcoming Monday night.
Well, and this is the problem if you're a team that runs the ball well and is used to controlling games that way, is Washington can jump all over you so fast, they can score so quickly that it takes you out of what you do. I think the question here is, can Michigan mix in a few things through the air, and will Michigan's receiving core look a little more dynamic against Washington than it did against Alabama? Because nobody looked like they were able to get open down the field against Alabama, and that was to be expected. There's a bunch of high draft picks that you're playing against when you're playing Alabama. Washington not quite as good on the back end, but Washington very good at getting after your quarterback. So the question is, does JJ McCarthy even have time to go find out if those guys are open?
Yeah, and I think it was interesting, too, on the flip side of that, Michigan's defense, they're one of the best teams against the pass. But you had Nick Saban saying, hey, we didn't have enough time to get our guys open downfield. But going into it, like, that was a big factor in the game for us. We wanted to attack that Michigan secondary. So on paper, I don't know if I'm, lining up with what Nick Saban is saying. But if Nick Saban is saying, we like Isaiah Bond, we like Jermaine Burton on our guys over their guys, and I'm looking at what Washington has, I'm saying, okay, no disrespect to Bama, but that's 3 NFL dudes in that wide receiver room, along with a good tight end.
Yeah, Washington's receivers are so much better than Alabama's. And Ohio State's receivers are probably the only group that's even comparable to Washington in the country. I don't know that Ohio State has 3 that good. Now, we know Ohio State's best one is better than everybody. But the question is, does anybody have 3 that good? And I don't think anybody does. And I was thinking about this today, JD. We were talking about it with Brock Huard. The Michigan defense has not had to play anything like this all season. Some players on the Michigan defense will remember playing against the Buckeyes when C.J. Stroud was the quarterback. Now, C.J. Stroud throwing to Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka, that's somewhat similar. That's actually a pretty good prep for this. But it hasn't happened in more than a year. Like, none of the Michigan defenders have seen anything like that this season.
And Josh Walls has never seen it ever. The transfer cornerback from UMass that it sounded like during that broadcast, Alabama was going to try and pick on a little bit. Now, Will Johnson versus Rome Odunze is just going to be like an NFL draft preview for all of us. I cannot wait to watch that one up close. But whoever Will Johnson doesn't cover is going to have a chance to get theirs. And we talked about it on our show a little bit. Like, you alluded to it already. Whenever Washington gets that deep pass game kind of dialed in, to me, it's a lot like Steph Curry hitting the 3. Like, you're probably bigger than Steph Curry, more athletic, better perimeter defense. But when he crosses half court and he's just feeling it that night, like that might kind of just be the story of the game. So pack a lunchbox, So that's kind of what I'm watching in this one. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I cannot wait to watch that matchup.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out, what did Arizona State do to really limit Washington, and they were dropping 8 quite a bit. I do wonder, can Michigan drop 7 or 8 and still have people get home? I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen. We've gone over and over again about how good Michigan's defensive line is. You look at what Mason Graham can do up the middle, Braden McGregor, Josiah Stewart. We sang his praises after that last play against Alabama, but nobody seems to be able to get to Penix quickly enough to stop him. Like, Jalen Milroe was having to look down, find the snap, then put his head up, and then figure. Like, that's why they had 6 sacks. Now, I do want to point out something that Nick Saban said on Pat McAfee on Thursday that I thought was really interesting. He said Michigan wasn't clapping because that's a penalty, but somebody was making some kind of sound that sounded like a clap, and Saban said that distracted Alabama's center. Now, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, because we've seen Alabama's center struggle with getting the ball back there during the season at various points. So, but I will say, I have had coaches tell me, and this is not talking about this Michigan team, but about just in general, if you can find a D lineman who can make a noise with his mouth that sounds like a very loud clap, that is an incredible skill for that person to have, because they'll never call it because they can't see you doing it.
Wow. All the kids watching at home, all you guys trying to add an extra star to your rating. Just saying, maybe put in the extra time after
I can just do this.
Whatever you got to do, man. You want to get on the field. One thing maybe you can do to add to make it a little more dangerous.
Yeah, I don't know that affects this game or not. That may be just Nick Saban sour graping it. I don't know. But if Michigan has something like that, that's pretty awesome. But I will say, this what worries me in this game for Washington, and I was all on board. I was ready to pick Washington. So I saw this tweet from Bill Connolly at ESPN. Bill's one of my favorite statistical nerds out there, and he appreciates being called a nerd. So he talked about how great it was that Michael Penix Jr. has thrown 21 passes to Rome Odunze when Washington's in-game win probability was under 50%. He's a ridiculous 19 for 21 for 333 yards. So like when they get in trouble, he throws to Rome Odunze. It works. They get down the field. But here's the part that Bill said that really caught my eye. Washington is currently 44th in the country in defensive SP+. So what defensive SP+ is, SP+ is a ranking that uses offensive and defensive success rates, explosive plays, turnovers, combines all that, and it is opponent and tempo adjusted. So if you played good teams, it knows you played good teams. If you played bad teams, it knows you played bad teams, and it adjusts for that. So the last national champion to rank outside the top 30 in S&P Plus on defense was Oklahoma in 1950. Like that 2010 Auburn defense, Bill points out, it wasn't very good. It was 27th. That's not 44th. So what I'm worried about is there's a non-zero chance that Michigan just comes in and runs for something like 9-10 yards a carry. And then even if you are scoring quickly, if you're Washington, eventually you just get worn down and you can't stop that. That's the part I worry about there. This is the type of defense that Michigan scores 50 on. And so while I don't think that means Michigan's going to win 65-7 like Georgia did at TCU, it worries me that you might see a Michigan win that's like 44 to 38 or something like that. That's where I get worried. Now, for those of us who are looking at this from a viewership standpoint and not from a gambling standpoint, like, hell yeah, let's go. Give us the shootout.
Yeah.
But it makes it very tricky with a 4.5 point spread.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, that if we have a game where Michigan's scoring in the 50s, I have a really hard time believing they're not winning, because that means they've just had their way, not just running the football, but also probably through the air at that point. And something I'm watching here closely, Andy, is in the fourth quarter, if Michigan has anything that resembles a lead, let's say they're up by a field goal. You and I both know, like at that point, Michigan's got you. They got you in a little sleeper hole, and they can just apply pressure and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze and lean on you to where you're probably already dog tired going 3 rounds with Michigan. But that fourth round where they can just run the football and kind of take time off the clock, I mean, we've seen that's where they're at their best. So where we are going into that fourth quarter, I'm 100% with you. That defense makes me very, very nervous. I mean, honestly, the more I talk it out statistically, I lean Michigan, but I'm at this point where I'm just like, I don't trust myself against Washington. Like I've seen it too many times. I don't trust myself picking against the Dogs. So I'm not making our picks right now or not, but it's curious.
That's my problem too, is I flipped to Washington for the Sugar Bowl because they had proven me wrong so many times that it was like, okay, you can't keep betting against these guys. Like and here's something that with Washington I think is important. I believe they've won their last 9 consecutive games by 10 or fewer points. So they are good in close games. They are well coached. Kalen DeBoer, we've talked about a lot. They make the right decisions most of the time. They go for it. Both these teams are really good at knowing when to go for it on fourth down.
Yeah, I like you said, the fact that they just have a steady hand all of the time whenever they're playing those one-score games. They're 8-0 in one-score games through this point in the season. Like they don't get nervous. They don't get. I mean, the comp for me here is like, Andy, you ever seen Alex Honnold, the free solo climber? You ever see that documentary? Mm-hmm. That is Washington to me. They did a study on his brain where apparently like he doesn't process pressure correctly, and thank goodness when you're thousands of feet up in the air with no ropes. That's Washington. Washington is the Alex Honnold of this college football playoff to me, and they've been that way this entire season. So I don't know what to think.
And I'm glad. We're not going it, because last year I couldn't even pretend it was going to be a competitive national championship game. Like people would, I know ESPN, they try to trump it up. They had their college game day, and people actually picked TCU. And it was, I landed in Los Angeles last year, and people are asking, like, no, this is not going to be close. Like, this is a horrific, historic mismatch. I'm not saying that at all about this game. I don't know what's going to happen here. I'm going to make a pick here in a minute, but I don't have supreme confidence in it just because I think both these teams, because we haven't seen them against the antecedent, we don't know what's going to happen. We just haven't seen, we don't have physical evidence of what happens when this team plays this type of team.
Yeah, Washington is not TCU. They might have given you the same feelings as a viewer throughout the course of this season, like a TCU, kind of like the Jesse Pinkman in Breaking Bad. They can't keep getting away with it feeling when they win by one score in Corvallis and they win by one score against Oregon for the second time. But just because they wear purple and they win close games throughout the course of a year, they're much better at quarterback. They are much more dangerous at the skill positions. They're much more physical up front. Like that line is what it is for a reason, whereas it was double digits a year ago this time in that TCU Georgia game.
Yeah, there's NFL players on both lines of scrimmage for Washington that can compete with the NFL players on both lines of scrimmage for Michigan. I think this is going to be an epically fun game. If it's as fun as the two we saw on Monday night, then we got the best 14 playoff yet. The last one will be the best one because we've never had one where the two semis were good and the title game was good. I think we're due for it. I think we're getting it. So JD, the floor is yours. Who you got?
So I thought I need a Hayes Fawcett graphic or something for this to make my decision. Respect my decision is kind of what they're saying these days. I said it earlier. I have picked against Washington many times this year. I have been wrong many times this year. I look at the logic. I look at the numbers. It says Michigan. I look at the line of scrimmage. It says Michigan. Look at the personnel up front with the big boys. It says Michigan. Now, with that being said, I think if they have their fastball, which is that deep shot to Rome Odunze, to Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, I think they will get enough of that going to put the pressure on Michigan's offense. I think it's close. Andy, I think that Michigan actually controls the ball enough when they have the football to keep it lower scoring. I like Washington 27-24, instant classic, send us out in style in the last of the 4-team playoff.
This is going to be fun because I was all set to agree with you. I was Washington all the way until that nerd Bill Connolly threw those numbers in my face. And I thought, what am I missing here? What am I missing? And I'll be honest, I've picked against Michigan a few times this year. I picked against Michigan when they played, let's see. Did I pick against them when they played Penn State? No, I picked them when they played Penn State. But I definitely picked against them when they played Alabama. And I don't feel that bad about it. It was a 1.5 point spread that got pushed to 2.5, and they ended regulation tied. So I feel okay about that one. But just watching that offensive line from Michigan get after the monsters that Alabama puts up on their defensive front, and watching those guys get pushed back, and watching at the end of the game where Michigan runs at a pretty slow pace. So it's not like they're trying to wear defenses out. And we asked Trevor Keegan, the Michigan offensive lineman, after the game, we said, did you think Alabama's defense was tired? He's like, nah. I'm telling you, I was at field level when they marched down the field in the fourth quarter to tie the game and force overtime. Alabama's defense was exhausted. When they threw that pass to Roman Wilson for the touchdown that tied it, it looked like Alabama's front seven was just done. It looked like they were cooked at that point. And so that's the part that scares me if I'm talking about a defense that hasn't been particularly great all season playing against Michigan. Because if we get that feeling from them in the second quarter, it's over. And so it's kind of up to Michael Penix and company to get this going fast, jump on them quick, and then force Michigan to play catch up. But I just think that there's a chance that Michigan can maybe apply that sleeper hold. So I am going to take the Wolverines. It kills me giving up 4.5 points. I love those 4.5 points that Washington gets. But no, give me Michigan to cover and lift the national title trophy.
I feel good knowing that at the end of the day, when the confetti falls in Houston, one of us will be right. Like, we're not going 0 for here when it comes to the On3 attendance in Houston. We will have one right national title pick, so we got our bases covered. And it makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense picking Michigan. I don't hate the pick by any stretch of the imagination. Like you said, should be a phenomenal, entertaining game.
Well, we'll be together. So the one who wins can say, I told you so, or at least force the one who loses to buy dinner. So we'll get it figured out. We got lots of options. You will get tons of coverage from me and JD in Houston. A little bonus action on Saturday from Media Day. We're going to have a pregame show on Monday in your time slot. You're going a little different
Yeah.
day, but your time slot. So this is going to be a fun weekend. I think it's going to be an incredible game, and I cannot wait to see it. JD, I will see you in Houston. Everybody else, we will talk on Saturday.